Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the biggest takeaways from the Wolves win over the Philadelphia 76ers on Saturday night. What can we take from that game? What can the Wolves build off of from this three-game winning streak as they get ready for what's actually a little bit of a lighter part of the schedule, a place where the Wolves should be able to rack up some wins if they do some of these things. Plus, the Wolves Heat preview for Monday night against a very banged-up Miami Heat team. It's all upcoming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. It is a game day. The Wolves take on the Heat tonight. We'll talk about that later in the show. First of all, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch the show on the all-new Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. This show, plus all the other great Locked On Minnesota shows, are available there. More great local sports coverage 24/7, and it's free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku or Amazon Fire TV today. You can also follow this show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and my account, which is at Beecken. And that's with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right. Let's talk first Wolves Sixers from Saturday. The Wolves beat Philadelphia on Saturday night. It was actually the first Timberwolves games this season that was decided by one possession, which is actually by 4 points or less, which is crazy. They were the last team in the league to have that happen to them, where they actually had their first one possession final score of the season, which is crazy. It's of course yet another game that the Wolves should have, held on to win by more. The Sixers, no James Harden, no Tyrese Maxey, no Tobias Harris. It was basically Joel Embiid. PJ Tucker would be the other starter, although he's actually played now 3 straight games where he hasn't scored at all. So Embiid was relied upon to do all of the scoring. There were other players who stepped up for Philadelphia in place of all the guys that were missing. I mean, Shake Milton had his first start of the season and was really, really good. D'Anthony Melton got to start, typically comes off the bench for them. George Niang was great off the bench. So guys stepped up and the Sixers made the game interesting. But there's a couple ways we could take this, right? And Marty Gellner and I talked about this on the postcast live about 45 minutes after the game on Saturday. We do that after every Wolves game over at Locked On Sports Minnesota on the YouTube channel. We discussed, on the one hand, yeah, this was the third straight game the Wolves were facing a shorthanded team that they should have beaten and were up double figures in most cases, I think in all 3 cases by 20 plus multiple times throughout the game, and ended up having to hang on at the end. On the other hand, Joel Embiid still plays for the Sixers. He was still fantastic, got 20 free throw attempts. And in that game specifically, and obviously Darius Garland went nuts in the Cavs game a week ago. But all that to say, these are still opportunities for the Wolves to fight through adversity in close, late situations, regardless of who the opponent is. When they find themselves in the situation, what do you have to do? You have to win. Obviously, giving up the lead is an issue, and that's something that needs to be addressed. But if the Wolves can gain some confidence, and how much of this is mental anyway, right? There's some game planning to it. There's substitution patterns. There's individual player effort, etc. There's a lot of reasons that all work together to allow for blown leads. But when you find yourself in that situation, the coming out on the other side with the W, the Wolves players aren't likely sitting in the locker room going, man, we just beat a shorthanded team. It shouldn't have been that close, right? They're probably happy with themselves for winning a close game. It builds confidence, even if it's subconscious, that the next time they're in a close late situation, they can win regardless of opponent. So whether that's Monday night, the Heat are likely to be shorthanded. They will be shorthanded Monday night. Or coming up this weekend, Charlotte, Indiana, teams that the Wolves should beat handily. Or you look a little further down the road and say it's the next time they play Memphis or the next time they play Phoenix or whoever that might be, a good team down the stretch. The Wolves should have some of that confidence that they know they can win in close situations. Yes, it was ugly that, there was a lot of ugliness that led up to that point in time to make it a one possession game at the end of the game. But again, once they were there, they found their way out of it. One of the things that I talked about with Marty on the postcast was that the Wolves defense, and this is my number one takeaway, mostly from Saturday's game against Philly, but even going back to Orlando, the Wolves defense has been so much more active lately. And that's really positive. Remember, their defense was down into, it was like 23rd or something in defensive rating. It's now up to 16th in the league, which isn't good still. But it's moving in the right direction. It's just been a lot more activity on defense. They tried a couple different things. They started with Rudy Gobert checking Joel Embiid one-on-one, and he did an okay job early, got into foul trouble. The second foul was absolutely a phantom call. It was not a foul on Rudy, but he had to head to the bench. Then Towns guarded Joel Embiid, and the Wolves would bring a late double. If it was in the post, they doubled on the catch. If it was on the perimeter, the Wolves almost had somebody almost kind of playing like they were playing Embiid with 1.5 guys. Like Towns was shading him one way or the other, and there was always help on the backside coming to help Towns with Embiid. And it mostly worked. Towns eventually got into some foul trouble in the third quarter. But I mean, Joel Embiid is unbelievable. And the Wolves made him work for everything he got. They forced him into a couple of travels on the night. They made him look uncomfortable with the ball in his hands. He ended up with 6 turnovers, with his 6 assists. Embiid did. Yeah, he scored 32 points, had 15 shots, but he got to the line a ton. And that's just what he does. And like, also, by the way, side note, this game just had way too many fouls in it overall. I'm not complaining about Embiid's 20 attempts, although I could. There was no flow to this game. The officials early in the game were letting them play in the first quarter. And then especially in the third quarter, it got bogged down. I mean, the teams combined for 67 points in the third quarter, and a ton of it was free throws. It was just unbelievable. It just turned into this slog. But anyway, I thought the Wolves defensively were very active, both in their game plan on Embiid and then also just in passing lanes. The help defense was very good. The rotations were crisp. Contest and recover. We were seeing guys do or help and recover, contesting shots on the perimeter. They weren't leaking out too quickly either. The defensive rebounding was actually pretty good. Overall for the game, the Wolves were a +4 rebounding the basketball against Philly, and they only gave up 4 offensive rebounds, albeit to a relatively undersized Philadelphia team, right? With Joel Embiid is the only really true big, and Paul Reed off the bench and Montrezl Harrell, both a little bit undersized, or at least in the case of Harrell, undersized for his position. And I thought the Wolves did a good job defensively. Foul trouble was really the only thing that was a major issue. It was the activity level that was so impressive to me. And active hands really gave Joel Embiid some problems. And active hands is not what we were seeing earlier this season. We started to see it more in Orlando on Wednesday. We saw it a little bit in Cleveland, although the defense late, again, that was more Darius Garland going nuts than anything else. But we're now at least 3 straight games. And even going back to the last loss the Wolves had, for parts of that game, the defense has just been more active. The hand down, man down thing, right? Like, it's so easy to be on the perimeter and keep your hands down by your sides. Going back to Orlando, we saw McLaughlin, we saw Anthony Edwards get steals by simply putting their hands up when they were guarding the ball. And like, it's a very easy thing, but that's exactly what they weren't doing 3 weeks ago, right? Even 2 weeks ago. And now we're starting to see that with more consistency. And that really gave Philadelphia some fits on Saturday night. Offensively in the third quarter, on the flip side of things, it was very clunky. The Wolves devolved into hero ball too much. We talked about how on Wednesday against Orlando, the Wolves did a really good job of calling a lot of sets down the stretch, and it actually slowed things down. The game got down to 9 points. The lead did, and the Wolves were able to stretch it back out because they were actually getting into their offense and running real sets, getting good shots. That didn't really happen in Philly. Excuse me. It became more of like this. It wasn't quite the my turn, your turn offense, but it was to an extent, right? It was Cat trying to be the hero against Embiid a couple of times. And then the very final, 3 or 4 possessions, it was D'Lo and Ant trying to put everything on their shoulders. And I'm glad that the Wolves have multiple guys that want to do that. They want to be the guy. That's a good thing. But it's not always in the team's best interest for D'Lo to dribble into a contested mid-range jumper. In fact, it usually isn't. And Ant, he had a bad turnover, got stripped on that final offensive possession, the second to last offensive possession. A couple possessions before that, he dribbled into a tough contested shot. He had a nearly airballed 3-pointer at the end of the shot clock, just with maybe 2 minutes to go in the game, 2.5 minutes to go in the game. There were several possessions like that where things were just stagnant, and guys said, you know what, I can take care of this. I can make this work. And that's not how it works. And thankfully, the Wolves were able to do just enough at the end to hold on and win. But the fourth quarter offense certainly got clunky. A couple more notes from Saturday, and then I want to flip that into what the Wolves need to do moving forward based on the schedule. And then we'll close the show here today by talking about the matchup against the Miami Heat on Monday night. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends at BetterHelp. Wouldn't life be so much easier if it came with a user manual, right? Like every single step of the way, having a tough time at work, having a tough time at home, whatever that might be. If I could just have a step-by-step on like exactly what to do, that would be fantastic. However, BetterHelp Online Therapy is basically the next best thing to a user manual. Even if life doesn't come with one, when life isn't working for you, it's normal to feel stuck. Navigating any of life's challenges can make you feel unsure, whether it's a career change, a new relationship, or becoming a parent for the first time. Therapists are trained to help you figure out the cause of challenging emotions and learn productive coping skills. That makes therapy the closest thing to a guided tour of the complex engine called you. BetterHelp has connected over 3 million people with licensed therapists. It's convenient and accessible anywhere, 100% online. As the world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp has matched 3 million people. Again, 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists, and it's completely online. It's absolutely affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with a therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It couldn't be simpler. No waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. That's BetterHelp, AEHELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Thanks for making Locked On Wolves your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today show. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights that only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Okay, we talked about the Wolves' very good defense on Saturday and improving defense over the past week. We talked about the clunky fourth quarter offense. Another thing related to the Wolves' offense is how much trouble opposing defenses' zone defense has given the Wolves. Any sort of zone scheme the Wolves have faced, they've completely faltered. And it's, I don't really know what it is. I mean, the Wolves don't have, I would imagine Chris Fidge, the coaching staff, have to have zone beaters drawn up, right? They have to have sets that they run when opposing teams go into zone. But so often what happens is the Wolves don't actually get into those sets, and it becomes a quick pick and roll and a tough mid-range jumper, or, the motion stops. Both the ball movement and the off ball movement completely stops against the zone. And the Sixers did a really good job of mixing in the zone, especially in the fourth quarter. They started doing it in the third, but the Sixers, Doc Rivers wasn't playing zone every time down the court. They weren't playing man every time down the court. They were just kind of mixing it up. And it tripped up the Wolves offensively in a big way. And the Wolves never really figured out how to solve that. It's something that at some point the Wolves are going to have to spend more time on it, because the book on the Wolves is going to be like, hey, throw in some zone if they're rolling offensively. And it'll be like, throwing something in the spokes of a bicycle tires or driving down the street. And the Wolves just suddenly have to catch their balance. And it gives you the chance, if you're the opposition on the other end, to gain some ground if you're behind in the game or build a lead if it's a close game, and before the Wolves kind of figure out what they need to do. And obviously no team plays zone, most of the time in the NBA, but teams can go zone heavy against the Wolves and find some success. So that's something Chris Finch and the Wolves coaching staff will need to try and figure out. As the Wolves get into games later this week against Charlotte and Indiana, I'm going to look into how often those teams play zone, and is that something the Wolves really need to be prepared for against these teams that otherwise are not very good, right? Indiana and Charlotte are both very winnable games for the Wolves, even on the road. And by the way, we'll talk more about the Heat. Miami's one of the league's best defensive teams. Even shorthanded, they're a good defense. The Wolves have to be ready for that on Monday night. Another thing from Saturday was I thought Jalen Noel was arguably the Wolves' best offensive player. Maybe D'Lo could have, argue for that distinction as well. But Jalen Noel had been pretty bad over the last 10 days or so, and he was really good on Saturday. He was efficient. And, he ended up scoring, let's see, what did he score? I lost it here. He had 13. Yeah, he had 13 on 7 shots, 2 of 4 shooting, got to the line for 2 free throws, had 2 assists, 2 rebounds, only 1 turnover in 14 minutes. And he was competitive defensively. He actually gave up some points on who he was guarding. I think Shake Milton had a couple tough shots to hit over him, but I thought Noel was actually playing hard defensively, and the Sixers really just made tough shots against him. And that's kind of the thing with Noel, right? Is he was basically useless, if I'm being honest, over the last few games, because prior to the Philly game, because his offense was so bad. He had a couple of games where he didn't make any shots from the field, And he's typically so bad defensively that he has to give you something in offense, so there's no sense in playing him. But I thought he was good on both ends against the Sixers, and hopefully that, that's something he could build off of as the Wolves move forward. He's going to be really important in these next few games. I think the Wolves bench unit is finally starting now that Kyle Anderson's back and, playing regular minutes now for the last few games. Now as Reed is part of the mix. Austin Rivers and Bryn Forbes have not seen regular minutes over the past week. So it does feel like Chris Finch has his regular 10. Finch even said before the game against Philadelphia that he thought he'd go deeper into the bench to try and take advantage of the Sixers' lack of depth, being that they were shorthanded. He didn't actually go any deeper. He just played 10 guys. Now, Nas hasn't played. He's had a couple DNP-CDs or played just garbage time recently after coming back from illness. But so he did get into this game earlier. I think that was more because of the foul trouble than anything else. But if Nas gets the opportunity to play more, like this is your 5-man bench unit, right? It's Jordan McLaughlin, Jalen Noel, Taurean Prince, Kyle Anderson, and Nas Reed. That's who it is. And I think it's a good group, and they played really well lately after having a couple of tough games mixed in there. That's going to be really important as the Wolves move into a meatier part of the schedule in terms of more back-to-backs. The Wolves have been fortunate of late. They've only played a couple so far this season, and they played Philly on Saturday on the second night of a back-to-back, and Miami, as we'll talk about here in a minute, on Monday, that's also the second night of a back-to-back. So the Wolves have had some rest advantages. Now they're going to go back out on the road, and the depth is really going to matter as the Wolves play more back-to-backs, play more road games. We're going to have to see likely Austin Rivers and Bryn Forbes get into the game more frequently. But to this point, Finch has kept that rotation fairly tight. So overall, the Wolves now are 16th in the league in offensive rating. They're 16th in defensive rating. This is coming into play on Sunday. And like both of those, obviously middle of the pack, they're 8-8. That makes sense. Everything is kind of middle of the road in terms of their overall stats as a team. Like what they've been doing, the 3-point percentage is still not good. It's 25th in the league, and the 3-point rate is still only 12th. The Wolves really need to be in top 10 in 3-point rate, and they can't be in the bottom, 5 or 6 in terms of 3-point percentage. That has to come up defensively. Now the Sixers game is going to throw this out of whack because we're still only 16 games into the season. But the free throw rate that had been so good on defense, the Wolves had done so well in avoiding opponent free throws. They're now 13th in free throw rate. They had been top 5 in least opponent free throw rate, I should say, up until recently. And the Sixers game and to a lesser extent the Magic game, but they played a couple of these games where there were a lot of fouls called. The Cleveland game was another one. And that's now 13th. They're still a bad defensive rebounding team. They're middle of the pack in creating turnovers. So even though opponents aren't shooting the ball as well, that's as much a function at this point of playing bad offenses that are shorthanded. Like, for instance, Orlando on Wednesday with hardly any starting level NBA talent on the floor, with no Banchero and, other guys missing, no Wendell Carter. And then a Sixers team that really only had Embiid and Shake Milton and I guess DeAnthony Melton as true offensive threats. That's more to do with the opponent than it is the Wolves defense. I do think, going back to what I said in the first segment, it's been more active in the passing. They're playing the passing lanes much better, but they're also committing more fouls, which is going to come with being more active. And they're not necessarily rebounding that much better. Although Philly, they did well against Philly. They just got to shore up some of the little stuff, right? The boxing out, the defensive rebounding, and then trying their best to not foul. Now, I will also say the Wolves have committed a lot of fouls this year. Like, even when they weren't giving up a ton of free throws. And I had said on the show, I think maybe about a week ago, that the Wolves, that they could have some good luck there. Like, they've been having good luck. They're committing a lot of fouls, but not giving up a lot of free throws. Eventually that's going to even out a little bit. We're starting to see that. They've committed the 7th most fouls per game of any team in the league, and they're still only 13th in free throw rate, but it's starting to shrink. That gap is starting to shrink. So hopefully that's something the Wolves could take some corrective action on the defensive end of the floor and not send, opponents to the free throw line with frequency, because that was one of the issues with this defense last year, right? That was part of the downfall of this defense late in the season. All right, I want to preview the Wolves Heat game. There are a lot of guys missing for Miami, and Miami's playing Sunday as well. So quite a bit to get to related to this matchup. So we're going to do that here next. First, though, let's talk about our title sponsors of today's show, and that is, of course, our friends over at PrizePicks. Monday night, I'm going to take Karl-Anthony Towns over points and maybe even rebounds, depending. I have to look and see what it's going to be. But against Miami, I feel like Cat could have a big game. Bam Adebayo at this point is questionable, so especially if Bam doesn't play, Karl-Anthony Towns could be a good play over at PrizePicks. If you're not familiar with PrizePicks, it's super easy. You just pick 2 to 6 players, and if they'll score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money, 25x. your money on any entry. You're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch. This includes NBA, NFL, Monday night. You could also cross sports and do the Wolves game and the NFL Monday Night Football game. Baseball when they're in season. Of course, we're in the middle of NHL, college sports, really anything. You can make your entries in 60 seconds or less, and it's really, really easy. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, they'll give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. All right, the Timberwolves take on the Miami Heat on Monday night at Target Center. It's the one home game and a 6 out of 7 on the road stretch for Minnesota, of course, on a 3-game win streak. The Heat, as of now, I'm recording this on Sunday before Miami plays. Miami takes on, they're at Cleveland on Sunday. Cleveland probably is without Kevin Love. He has a hand fracture and is listed as doubtful. So a bit of a shorthanded Cleveland team, although I believe for the most part they're healthy otherwise with the guys that had been out last week when the Wolves played them. Miami, on the other hand, on Friday night, Miami only had 7 guys that actually got into the game and played against the Washington Wizards. They lost by 1 in overtime to the Wizards. Kyle Lowry played 51 minutes out of a possible, 53 minutes in an overtime game. 51 minutes for Kyle Lowry on Friday night, had 24 and 15. And they were starting Haywood Highsmith, who's somebody who played, I think he's played 24 total career games before the season, has started 1 game in his career and started for the Heat on Saturday night and ended up playing 42 minutes, had 12 points, 14 rebounds. Nikola Jovic is starting and playing heavy minutes for them. He needs to play well for them against the Wolves on Monday. Max Strus is a big part of their starting lineup now. Like, a 7-man rotation in an overtime game is not ideal for Eric Spoelstra and the Heat. On Monday, or I should say on Sunday, the Heat already ruled out Jimmy Butler for the rest of the road trip. So Butler will not play on Monday against the Timberwolves. The rest of their injury report, this is going into Sunday's game because, again, as of this recording, they haven't played yet. Adebayo is questionable. Dwayne Dedmon is questionable. Gabe Vincent is questionable. None of those guys played Friday. Duncan Robinson is doubtful. He did not play Friday. He hurt his hand in shoot-around. And then we already talked about Butler being out, but basically everybody else on that roster is out too. So a host of questionable players, like they're not in any position to rest anybody on the second night of a back-to-back, but Monday is a back-to-back for Miami as well, playing in Cleveland on the road on Sunday. So they go from Cleveland to Minnesota, Sunday to Monday, very shorthanded team. It's really tough to say what to expect out of Miami because they're so shorthanded. I will say they're still a very good defensive team, right? And this is I think they were 5th in the league in defensive rating last season. As of right now, coming into play on Sunday, they still rank 10th in defensive rating. They were a top 5 unit last year. They're 10th this year. The offense is struggling. But otherwise, it's a very similar team. They're not making threes at the same clip they were last year, but they're shooting more of them. They're still getting to the free throw line a fair amount. And they're actually 4th in free throw rate, and they're 1st in free throw percentage. So the offense isn't exactly humming for them, but when they get to their spots, they can score. Now, Jimmy Butler is a big part of the free throw rate for them. He's played in 13 of their 16 games so far, and he won't play Monday. Kyle Lowry is playing extremely well offensively for them. If Bam Adebayo doesn't play, though, and there's no Jimmy Butler, and we know I didn't mention Tyler Hero, he's unlikely to play on Monday. This team doesn't have a lot of their best individual defenders either. I mean, you're looking at like not a lot of plus defenders in terms of what's left on this roster. And like I mentioned, Jovic, he's going to have to play really well for them if they're going to be in the game on Monday against the Wolves. Be curious to see what happens to them in Cleveland on Sunday. But at any rate, for the Wolves, the keys for this game, again, a game they absolutely should win against a team that likely will only have 8 or 9 guys available max, is going to be not fouling. A team that gets the line a ton is Miami. They're not great offensively otherwise. Don't commit fouls. Don't get in the bonus early. Be careful with, in the half court with allowing them to get into the paint and then fouling them. Miami's not a great offensive rebounding team, but as it almost always is, almost every single night for the Wolves, you can say a key to the game is defensive rebounding. That has to be a key, even though it's not a thing that Miami does a ton of, especially if there's no Dedmon, no Adebayo. you still have to, like, it's all the more reason to not allow the Heat some easy baskets on the glass. If the Wolves play decent on the glass, they should find a way to win this game against the Miami Heat to limit those second chance points. Again, they only give up 4 offensive rebounds to Philly on Saturday. So they've improved a little bit lately in that category, rebounding all 5, right? Not just leaving it up to Rudy and Cat, but Ant and Jaden McDaniels and D'Lo and the bench unit. Those guys all getting in there and rebounding in no man's land between, the 5-6 feet from the rim and the 3-point line. That entire space of no man's land, the Wolves have to occupy it and do their best to limit the Heat to one opportunity on every possession. The Wolves themselves need to get into the paint and score. Miami doesn't allow a ton of free throws, and they're a good defensive team, but they also don't block a lot of shots. They're a good defensive rebounding team, but they force a lot of turnovers. But instead of trying to do too much on the perimeter and, run a lot of flare screens and try and get open threes and things like that against the Heat, I think it's more important to attack on the inside. So whether that's, if there's no Bam Adebayo, and again, he's questionable Sunday, maybe he plays Monday. But if there's no Adebayo, getting Towns some post touches, getting Rudy some touches at the rim, having him rim run in transition, having him try and seal at the front of the rim in the half court, and high-low passing from Towns to Gobert. There's not a real shot blocking threat, especially without Adebayo, but even generally, the Heat don't block a ton of shots. Get in the paint, try to get some foul calls, and work inside out, which sounds super old school, but I think this is a team that's smarter to do that against because, again, the Heat are disciplined defensively. They're going to get steals on the perimeter if the Wolves are sloppy, and at times, D'Lo and Ant have shown a propensity to be sloppy so far this season with the ball on the perimeter. So the Wolves really need to be a little bit careful against this Miami Heat team. So again, recapping that, doing their best to not to commit too many fouls on defense. Don't allow the Heat to get to the line. Defensive rebound the ball. The Heat aren't a great offensive rebounding team. Don't give them those second chance opportunities and easy baskets that way. And then the third thing is on offense for the Wolves, try to get into the paint, get the Heat into as much foul trouble as possible because they don't have as much depth. They're going to be shorthanded. And the Heat are good enough defensively on the perimeter to disrupt things and wreak havoc. The Heat don't like to play fast, so the Wolves can also try and speed up tempo. But if you better believe that if Kyle Lowry is getting steals on the perimeter because he's jumping passing lanes and active hands, the Wolves are being sloppy, they're going to get some easy points going the other way. And again, a team that doesn't get a ton of second chance points, a team that doesn't score a ton in transition, don't give them those easy baskets to supplement what's generally been a pretty pedestrian offense for Miami to this point this season. All right. That's all we have for you today here on the show. A quick programming note. Of course, we'll do the live postcast 45 minutes after Wolves Heat on Monday with Marnie Gellner. That's over live on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. It'll post the audio feed. We'll post on all the Locked On Wolves audio platforms following the live show. Also, later this week, I do plan to do a post-game show after Wednesday night's Wolves game, and we'll talk about the rest of the schedule. We didn't get as much into those matchups as I thought I would today on the show. We'll get into that on a future show, but we will do a post-game podcast on Wednesday that'll actually probably post Thanksgiving morning, and I probably will not have a show for Friday, so I won't be recording a show for Friday after Thanksgiving. So likely just 4 full shows this week, but we'll do postcasts after every game, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, as we always do. So a big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, the show's everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken. That's with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. You can also listen on Locked On Sports Minnesota, or I should say you can watch on Locked On Sports Minnesota, the all-new app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can download the app and watch this show, as well as all the other Locked On Minnesota shows. That's all we have for you today. Again, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. A reminder that you can make your second listen, the fantastic Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.